The bright morning sun shone down on Oak Grove Apartments as the Johnson family's moving truck pulled into the parking lot. Marcus Johnson, a tall man with kind eyes and a warm smile, stepped out of the driver's seat and looked up at their new home. The three-story brick building stood proudly among well-kept gardens, promising a fresh start for his family. His wife Diana, an elementary school teacher with graceful movements and natural confidence, helped their children out of the back seat. 8-year-old Maya, wearing her favorite yellow dress with butterflies, jumped out excitedly while holding her little brother Tyler's hand. At 6 years old, Tyler clutched his beloved teddy bear as he took in the new surroundings with wide eyes. "Look, Mommy, they have a playground." Maya pointed to the colorful play area visible from the parking lot. The children's faces lit up at the sight of swings and slides, momentarily forgetting their nervousness about moving to a new place. As the family began unloading boxes, several neighbors passed by with friendly waves and welcoming smiles. An elderly couple even stopped to introduce themselves as the Pattles, offering to bring over some homemade curry once the Johnsons were settled in. The positive welcome made Marcus and Diana feel hopeful about their choice to move here. However, not everyone shared the same welcoming spirit. From a second-floor window, Karen Webster watched the scene unfold with narrowed eyes and a tight-lipped frown. She had lived in Oak Grove Apartments for 15 years and prided herself on maintaining what she called the proper atmosphere of the community. The sight of the Johnson family immediately set her on edge. Karen's fingers drummed against her windowsill as she observed Marcus carrying a large TV into the building. She noticed Diana organizing boxes with efficient movements, the children helping with smaller items while laughing and playing between trips. Everything about them seemed normal and pleasant, but Karen had already made up her mind. Later that afternoon, as Diana arranged family photos on the wall of their new living room, a knock on the door surprised her. Opening it, she found Mrs. Chen from apartment 3C holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. The elderly Asian woman's eyes crinkled with warmth as she welcomed them to the building. "My grandchildren love playing at the playground here," Mrs. Chen said, glancing at Maya and Tyler who were peeking curiously from behind their mother. "Perhaps they can all play together sometime." The conversation was interrupted by the distinct sound of a door slamming shut across the hall. Karen stood in her doorway, giving the gathering an obvious look of disapproval before hanging a "quiet hours strictly enforced" sign on her door with unnecessary force. Mrs. Chen simply rolled her eyes and spoke in a lower voice. "Don't mind Karen. She's been here forever but never learned how to be a good neighbor." Her kind words helped ease some of the tension that had suddenly filled the air. That evening, as the Johnson family sat among partially unpacked boxes eating pizza for dinner, they discussed their first impressions of their new home. Marcus and Diana exchanged knowing looks when Maya mentioned the angry lady across the hall, but they encouraged their children to focus on the positive aspects of their new community. "Remember what we always say," Diana told the children as she helped Tyler with his pizza slice. "We can't control how others act, but we can control how we respond." Marcus nodded in agreement, though he couldn't shake a slight feeling of unease. After 15 years working in corporate management, he had developed a sixth sense for detecting potential problems. Something in Karen's obvious disdain reminded him of obstacles he faced before. Still, as he watched his family settle into their new home, Maya arranging her books on a shelf, Tyler already asleep on the couch with his teddy bear, and Diana humming while organizing the kitchen, Marcus felt determined. They had chosen this apartment for its good school district, convenient location, and diverse community. They had every right to be here, and no disapproving neighbor was going to change that. As night fell over Oak Grove Apartments, the Johnson family prepared for their first night in their new home, unaware that their simple presence had already set in motion events that would soon test their resilience, challenge their community, and ultimately reveal both the best and worst in their neighbors. The first week at Oak Grove Apartments passed quickly for the Johnson family as they settled into their new routine. Maya and Tyler had discovered that the playground was even better than it looked, with a special climbing wall that became their favorite spot. Their laughter often filled the afternoon air as they played with other children from the building. But Karen Webster's disapproval grew stronger with each passing day. She started her campaign small, standing at her window with a phone in hand, obviously recording whenever the Johnson children played outside, even though they were only out between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m., well within the building's allowed hours for the playground. On Tuesday afternoon, Diana found the first note stuck to their door. Written in sharp, angry handwriting, it read, "Some of us have lived here for years maintaining high standards. Please keep your children quiet and controlled at all times." Diana took a photo of the note before removing it, starting a folder on her phone labeled Incidents. Marcus noticed Karen watching them whenever they left for work or school. She would crack her door open just enough to peer out, then slam it shut when they looked her way. He began leaving for work 10 minutes earlier just to avoid these uncomfortable encounters. The situation got worse when Karen started calling the property management office daily. "Those people are destroying the peace and quiet of our community," she complained to Jessica, the office manager. "Their children are running wild, and I can hear them walking around their apartment at all hours." Jessica, who had already received 5 similar calls that week, tried to explain that normal daily sounds were allowed during daytime hours. But Karen wouldn't listen. Instead, she started posting on the building's community Facebook page about declining property values and certain elements changing the neighborhood's character. One evening, as Diana helped Maya with her homework at the kitchen table, they heard loud banging on their ceiling. Karen, who lived in the apartment above them, was hitting her floor with what sounded like a broom handle. The noise continued for nearly an hour. "Mommy, why is the angry lady always mad at us?" Maya asked, struggling to concentrate on her math problems. "We're not doing anything wrong." Diana hugged her daughter close. "Some people have trouble accepting others who are different from them, sweetie. But that's their problem, not ours. We just need to keep being ourselves." The next morning, Karen cornered Mrs. Chen in the hallway. "You should sign my petition," she insisted, waving a paper filled with what appeared to be mostly her own handwriting. "These new tenants are ruining everything. Surely you understand how important it is to maintain standards?" Mrs. Chen straightened her small frame to its full height. "The only thing ruining our community is prejudice," she replied firmly, walking away and leaving Karen red-faced and sputtering. Later that day, Karen spotted Tyler playing with his cars in the hallway while Diana carried groceries inside. Even though the 6-year-old was sitting quietly by his own door, Karen stormed out of her apartment. "This is a hallway, not a playground," she shouted, causing Tyler to scramble inside in fear. "I'm documenting everything. Just wait until the property owner hears about this." Diana, who had witnessed the entire scene, stepped into the hallway. "Please don't yell at my child," she said calmly, though her hands shook slightly. "If you have concerns, you can discuss them with us respectfully or take them to management." "Oh, I will," Karen sneered, pulling out her phone to record Diana. "I'm building a case. People like you always show your true colors eventually." That evening, as the Johnson family ate dinner together, they discussed the growing tension. Marcus suggested maybe they should look for another apartment, but Diana shook her head. "We can't let bullies win," she said firmly. "Besides, most of our neighbors have been wonderful. We won't let one person's hatred drive us away from our home." Unknown to them, Karen was already drafting a lengthy email to Richard Martinez, the property owner, filled with exaggerated complaints and carefully edited video clips that showed only fragments of normal family activities, twisted to look suspicious. She smiled as she pressed send, certain that her evidence would finally get the response she wanted. Karen's email to the property owner was just the beginning of her new strategy. After a week of not getting the response she wanted from management, she decided to take things further. One quiet Sunday morning, she began knocking on every door in Oak Grove Apartments, clutching a folder full of what she called evidence. "Did you know there are unauthorized people living in apartment 2B?" she whispered to anyone who would listen. "I've seen strange men coming and going at all hours." This was completely false. She had only seen Marcus's brother helping with some furniture assembly one weekend. Most neighbors shut their doors in Karen's face, already tired of her constant complaints. But she managed to find a few sympathetic ears among newer residents who didn't know better. Mrs. Rodriguez from 4C listened politely before telling her daughters in Spanish, "Stay away from that woman. She has hatred in her heart." Meanwhile, the Johnsons were dealing with a new series of problems. Someone had started filing false maintenance complaints about their apartment. The building handyman, Mike, had to check their bathroom 3 times in 1 week for supposedly leaking water. "I'm sorry about this," Mike said to Diana during his 3rd visit. "I can tell these complaints are bogus. Your apartment is one of the best maintained I've seen. He wrote up his findings carefully, making sure to document that there were no issues found. Karen's next move was to create a fake social media account. She began posting made-up stories about suspicious activities at Oak Grove Apartments, always being careful not to mention the Johnsons by name, but making it clear who she was talking about. She even claimed to have video evidence of late-night parties, though no such parties had ever happened. One afternoon, Maya came home from school in tears. Bobby from 5 said his mom won't let him play with me anymore because we're bad people. She sobbed into her mother's arms. Diana held her daughter tight, fighting back her own tears. Marcus decided it was time to take action. He compiled all the photos, notes, and recordings they had collected since moving in. The folder included Karen's threatening notes, timestamps of her harassment, and statements from friendly neighbors who had witnessed her behavior. He also printed out screenshots of her social media posts, which several concerned neighbors had sent them. "We need to protect our children," he told Diana as they reviewed everything at their kitchen table. "This isn't just about us anymore." The situation reached a breaking point when Karen tried to convince the local police that the Johnsons were running an illegal business from their apartment. Officers arrived one evening to find Diana helping Maya sell Girl Scout cookies in the lobby, an activity that was perfectly allowed and that other children in the building also did. Officer Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, quickly saw through Karen's false report. "Ma'am," she said to Karen, who was watching eagerly from her doorway, "filing false police reports is a serious offense. Consider this a warning." The next day, Mrs. Chen organized an impromptu cookie buying event to support Maya. Almost every family in the building showed up, forming a line that stretched into the parking lot. Even the building's maintenance staff bought several boxes each. "This is how we show what our community really stands for," Mrs. Chen announced loudly enough for Karen to hear through her closed door. The event raised enough money to send Maya's entire Girl Scout troop to summer camp. But Karen wasn't finished. That evening, she drafted a formal complaint letter to Richard Martinez, the property owner. She included carefully edited clips from her phone recordings, making normal daytime activities look suspicious by adding false timestamps suggesting they happened at midnight. "If you don't take action," she wrote, "I'll be forced to contact my lawyer about the declining living conditions and safety issues in this building." She attached her petition, which had only gathered 5 signatures, 3 of them from her own relatives who didn't even live in the building. As Karen sealed the envelope with a triumphant smile, she didn't realize that her actions had united the rest of the building's residents against her. The community she claimed to be protecting had already chosen its side, and it wasn't hers. The annual Oak Grove Summer Barbecue was a beloved tradition that brought all residents together in the building's spacious backyard. This year, the event coincided with the first truly warm Saturday of summer. Colorful balloons decorated the garden area, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. Marcus had volunteered to help with the grilling, expertly flipping burgers while chatting with other residents. Diana was helping Mrs. Chen set up the dessert table, where her homemade banana pudding sat next to treats from around the world. Mrs. Paddle's gulab jamun, Mrs. Rodriguez's tres leches cake, and Mrs. Chen's egg tarts. Maya and Tyler played with other children on the nearby playground, their laughter mixing with the sound of music from the small speaker system. The atmosphere was festive and peaceful until Karen arrived. She walked into the gathering like a storm cloud on a sunny day, clutching her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Marcus at the grill, surrounded by appreciative neighbors praising his cooking skills. At first, Karen stayed at the edge of the party, taking videos with her phone and muttering to herself. But everything changed when she went to her car and found a small scratch on her driver's side door. "Everyone, stop what you're doing." Karen's voice cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. She marched toward the gathering, her face red with anger. "Look what they did to my car." The music stopped. Children paused in their games. All eyes turned to Karen as she pointed dramatically at the Johnson family. "I saw your children playing near my car earlier," she accused, her finger now aimed directly at Marcus and Diana. "This is what happens when you let them run wild. This scratch will cost hundreds to fix." Diana started to speak, but Mrs. Chen stepped forward first. "That's impossible," the elderly woman said firmly. "The children have been on the playground all afternoon. I've been watching them while helping with the food." "Well, They must have done it some other time, Karen insisted, her voice getting louder. These people have been causing problems ever since they moved in. My car was perfect before they came. Just then, Mike the maintenance man cleared his throat. Actually, Karen, I have security camera footage from yesterday showing exactly how that scratch got there. He pulled out his tablet and pressed play. The gathered crowd watched as the video clearly showed Karen herself backing into a yellow pole in the parking lot the previous afternoon. Several people gasped. "You've been targeting this family since day one," Mrs. Chen said, her usual gentle voice filled with steel. "I've lived here for 20 years, and I remember how you treated the Martinez family before they moved out, and the Wangs before them." Other longtime residents began nodding and speaking up. "You complained about my cooking smells when I first moved in," Mrs. Patel added, "but you stopped when I brought my concerns to management. And you tried to get my family evicted because my children spoke Spanish in the hallway," Mrs. Rodriguez joined in. Karen's face turned from red to white as more neighbors shared their stories. Even Bobby's mom from 5 stepped forward. "I'm ashamed I ever listened to your lies," she said, placing a supportive hand on Diana's shoulder. "My son misses playing with Maya. I hope she'll come over again soon." Karen looked around wildly, realizing she had lost control of the situation. "You're all ganging up on me. This is harassment. I'll report all of you." "The only harassment here has been from you," Marcus said calmly, removing his grilling apron. "We documented everything. Every note, every false complaint, every threatening message. And we all have copies," Mrs. Chen added, gesturing to the other residents. "We've been sending everything to Mr. Martinez, the property owner." Karen's phone slipped from her trembling fingers as she looked around at the united faces of her neighbors. For the first time, she was the one who felt unwelcome. "This isn't over," she sputtered, backing away from the crowd. "You'll all be hearing from my lawyer." As Karen stormed off, the community naturally drew closer together. The music resumed, children returned to their games, and the afternoon continued, now with a stronger sense of unity and purpose. The confrontation had brought out the truth, and there was no going back. The Monday after the barbecue incident, Karen launched her biggest attack yet. She marched into the property management office as soon as it opened, carrying a thick manila envelope. Jessica, the office manager, held back a sigh as Karen slapped the envelope on her desk. "This is going directly to Mr. Martinez," Karen announced, her voice shaking with what she probably thought was authority. "I'm done dealing with the local office. You've ignored my complaints for too long." The envelope contained a 20-page document that Karen had spent all Sunday creating. She had printed out her edited videos as still images, collected her fake petition signatures, and written a long letter demanding the Johnsons' immediate eviction. She even included printouts of made-up noise complaints from anonymous residents, all written in suspiciously similar handwriting. "If Mr. Martinez doesn't act on this, I'll take legal action against the entire complex," Karen threatened before storming out. She made sure to say it loud enough for other residents in the office to hear. Meanwhile, Marcus and Diana were preparing for work and school as usual, trying to maintain a normal routine despite the stress. As they helped Maya and Tyler get ready for school, they didn't know about Karen's latest move. "Remember? Head up high," Diana told the children as she straightened Maya's backpack. "We have nothing to be ashamed of." The children nodded, though Tyler still held his mother's hand a little tighter than usual. By afternoon, Karen's complaint had reached Richard Martinez's office. The property owner, a man who had built his business from the ground up over 30 years, sat at his desk reading through Karen's materials with growing concern, though not for the reasons Karen had hoped. Mr. Martinez noticed something odd about the timestamps on Karen's photos. He pulled up the building's security camera footage on his computer and began comparing times and dates. The more he looked, the more disturbed he became. "Linda," he called to his assistant, "please pull all complaints filed about apartment 2B in the last 3 months. And get me the full security footage for the dates mentioned in this document." While Mr. Martinez investigated, Karen couldn't help but brag about her actions to anyone who would listen. She cornered Mrs. Patel by the mailboxes. "They'll be gone within a week," she said smugly. "I've made sure of it this time. I have proof of everything." Mrs. Patel simply shook her head and walked away, pulling out her phone to send a quick text to Mrs. Chen. Within minutes, a chain of messages spread through the building's residents, all sharing what Karen had done. That evening, a group of neighbors gathered in Mrs. Chen's apartment. They brought copies of every hostile note Karen had sent them over the years, recordings of her racist comments, and statements about her harassment. "We can't let her win," Mrs. Chen said, organizing the materials. "This isn't just about the Johnsons anymore. It's about every family she's tried to drive away." While the neighbors worked together, Mr. Martinez continued his investigation late into the night. He reviewed security footage, maintenance reports, and years of complaint records. He discovered that Karen had filed similar complaints against 6 different families in the past decade, all of them minorities. The next morning, Karen woke up to an email from Mr. Martinez's office. Her heart leaped when she saw it, assuming it contained news about the Johnsons' eviction. Instead, it requested her presence at a mandatory tenant meeting scheduled for the following day. Finally, Karen thought, missing the word mandatory in her excitement. She spent the next hour calling her few allies in the building, writing about how her complaint had worked. But in his office, Mr. Martinez was having a very different conversation with his legal team. He spread out 2 piles of documents on his conference table, Karen's complaints on one side and the evidence of her harassment gathered by residents on the other. "We need to handle this carefully," he told his lawyers, "but we also need to send a clear message. Discrimination has no place in my properties." As the day drew to a close, no one in Oak Grove Apartments knew that tomorrow's meeting would change everything. Karen went to bed feeling triumphant, while the Johnson family tried to sleep despite their worries. Only Mr. Martinez knew exactly what was about to happen, and he was determined to make it count. Richard Martinez arrived at Oak Grove Apartments early the next morning, before most residents had left for work. He sat in the management office with Jessica, reviewing security footage on a large monitor while his team spread documents across the conference table. "Show me all footage of the playground between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. for the past month," he requested. The videos revealed exactly what he expected: children playing normally, including Maya and Tyler Johnson, always under adult supervision and never causing any trouble. Jessica pulled out a thick folder. "These are all of Karen Webster's complaints from the past 5 years, she explained, her voice tired. "I've highlighted a pattern you should see." Mr. Martinez noticed immediately that Karen's complaints always started within weeks of a minority family moving in. He found reports against the Martinez family, no relation to him, from 3 years ago, filled with similar accusations about noise and suspicious behavior. That family had eventually moved out, unable to handle the constant harassment. "Get me the rental applications for the past 10 years, he said, his face growing more serious with each document he reviewed. The pattern was clear. Karen had targeted every non-white family that moved into the building. Around noon, Mike the maintenance man knocked on the office door. He carried his tablet and a stack of work orders. "Sir, you asked about apartment maintenance records." Mike pulled up his digital files. "I've been keeping detailed notes ever since I noticed something odd about Karen's complaints. Every time she reported a leak or noise from the Johnsons' apartment, I found nothing wrong. But look at this." Mike showed them videos he had taken during his inspections, documenting the perfect condition of the Johnsons' apartment. He also had recordings of strange scratches appearing on their door after Karen was seen in the hallway on security cameras. "And here's something else," Mike added, pulling out his phone. He played a recording of Karen offering him money to file false maintenance reports about the Johnsons. "I rejected her, of course, and saved this as evidence." Mr. Martinez nodded gravely, adding the recording to his growing collection of evidence. Next, he interviewed other residents who had volunteered to share their experiences. Mrs. Rodriguez showed him threatening notes Karen had left on her door about speaking English only. Mrs. Patel described how Karen had complained about cooking smells until management intervened. Even Bobby's mom came forward to apologize for believing Karen's lies and keeping her son from playing with Maya. In the early afternoon, Mr. Martinez met with Mrs. Chen in her apartment. The elderly woman had lived in the building longest and had witnessed Karen's behavior from the beginning. "She thinks she owns this place," Mrs. Chen explained, serving tea. "Every time a new family moves in, she appoints herself as some kind of building police. But only for certain families, if you understand my meaning." Mrs. Chen opened a box she had kept hidden in her closet. Inside were years of documented incidents, dated photographs, handwritten accounts, and even old emails from former residents who had moved away because of Karen's harassment. "I always knew someday someone would need to know the truth," she said quietly. "I just hoped it would be someone who could finally do something about it." Back in his office, Mr. Martinez reviewed everything with his legal team. They examined Karen's lease agreement, which included clear anti-discrimination clauses. They studied the building's security footage showing her following the Johnson children with her phone, leaving notes, and confronting residents. "Look at the timestamps on her complaint photos," his lawyer pointed out. "She deliberately changed them to make normal daytime activities look like they happened at midnight. That's fraud." As evening approached, Mr. Martinez made his final decision. He drafted two important documents, one that would protect the Johnson family and another that would solve the Karen problem permanently. "Schedule the mandatory tenant meeting for tomorrow at 6 p.m., he instructed Jessica. "Make sure everyone knows attendance is required." Jessica nodded, understanding the significance of what was about to happen. As she sent out the meeting notification, residents' phones buzzed throughout the building. Karen, still confident in her victory, smiled at the message. The Johnsons, worried but hopeful, held each other's hands as they read it. No one except Mr. Martinez knew that tomorrow's meeting would change Oak Grove Apartments forever, and finally bring justice to those who deserved it most. The community room at Oak Grove Apartments had never been so full. At 5:45 p.m., residents filled every chair, with more people standing along the walls. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Karen arrived early, choosing a seat in the front row. She wore her best dress and carried her folder of evidence, a smug smile playing on her lips. She assumed this meeting would end with the Johnson family's eviction. The Johnsons entered quietly, Marcus and Diana holding hands while Maya and Tyler stayed close to their parents. Mrs. Chen immediately waved them over to sit with her group of supportive neighbors. At exactly 6 p.m., Richard Martinez walked in, accompanied by Jessica from the management office and two people no one recognized, his lawyer and a representative from the Fair Housing Commission. "Good evening, everyone," Mr. Martinez began, his voice firm and clear. "I've called this mandatory meeting to address a serious situation that has been developing in our community." Karen sat up straighter, her smile widening, but her expression froze when Mr. Martinez clicked to the first slide of his presentation. Over the past several years, Oak Grove Apartments has had multiple incidents of harassment and discrimination. Today, we're going to review these incidents and announce our decision about how to move forward. The screen showed a timeline of complaints filed by Karen Webster, alongside move-in dates of minority families. The pattern was impossible to miss. "Ms. Webster," Mr. Martinez turned to face her directly, "you have filed exactly 27 complaints in the past 5 years. Remarkably, every single one targeted families of color." Karen's face turned red. "That's not true. I only report real problems." "Let's review the evidence," Mr. Martinez continued calmly. He played a series of security videos showing Karen following residents with her phone, posting notes, and confronting children. Then he showed the maintenance records proving her complaints were false. "But the most disturbing evidence," he said, "is this." He played Mike's recording of Karen offering him money to file false reports about the Johnsons. The room filled with shocked gasps. Karen jumped to her feet. "That's private. You can't show that." "Actually, we can," Mr. Martinez's lawyer spoke up. "All common areas in this building are monitored for security purposes, as clearly stated in your lease agreement." Mr. Martinez then invited several residents to share their experiences. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about the language discrimination. Mrs. Patel described the harassment about her cooking. Former residents had even sent video statements about why they really moved away. Through it all, Karen's face went from red to white to almost green. She tried to interrupt several times, but Mr. Martinez firmly kept control of the meeting. "Ms. Webster," he finally announced, "your actions have violated multiple clauses in your lease agreement, state housing laws, and federal anti-discrimination regulations. You have created a hostile living environment and attempted to use fraudulent evidence to evict innocent families." He held up an official document. "This is a notice of lease termination. You have 30 days to vacate your apartment." The room went completely silent. Karen stood up, shaking with anger. "You can't do this to me. I've lived here for 15 years. I'll sue you. You're welcome to pursue legal action, the Fair Housing Commission representative spoke up. But I should warn you that we have enough evidence here to pursue our own case against you for systematic discrimination. Karen looked around the room wildly, searching for support, but found none. Every face showed either disapproval or relief at the announcement. As for the Johnson family, Mr. Martinez continued, they will of course be staying with us. Their lease has been renewed for 2 years at their current rate, if they choose to accept. Diana burst into tears of relief while Marcus hugged their children. Around them, neighbors began to applaud. Furthermore, Mr. Martinez added, we're implementing new anti-discrimination policies and establishing a resident council to ensure nothing like this happens again. Mrs. Chen has agreed to lead this initiative. Karen grabbed her folder and stormed toward the door, but turned for one last attack. This whole building will go downhill now. You'll all be sorry. The only thing we're sorry about, Mrs. Chen called out clearly, is not stopping you sooner. As Karen slammed the door behind her, the atmosphere in the room visibly lightened. Neighbors began hugging each other, and someone started passing around cookies they had brought. The Johnson children ran to play with their friends, including Bobby, whose mother was now crying as she apologized again to Diana. Mr. Martinez watched it all with satisfaction, knowing he had made the right decision. Oak Grove Apartments wasn't going downhill. It was finally becoming the community it was always meant to be. 1 month after the memorable tenant meeting, Oak Grove Apartments felt like a completely different place. The morning sun shone down on moving trucks in the parking lot, but this time they were there for Karen's departure. Mike the maintenance man supervised as Karen dragged her belongings out of the building. She had waited until the last possible day of her 30-day notice, probably hoping Mr. Martinez would change his mind. He hadn't. Need any help with those boxes? Mike offered professionally, even though Karen had never shown him the same courtesy. Just make sure nothing happens to my things, she snapped, still acting like she was in charge. But her voice lacked its usual confidence. From their windows, residents watched Karen's exit with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Mrs. Chen had organized a community breakfast for later that morning, knowing everyone would want to celebrate this new chapter together. In the Johnsons' apartment, Maya was helping Tyler put on his favorite dinosaur t-shirt. We can play on the playground whenever we want now, she told her little brother with a big smile. Tyler grinned back, no longer afraid to be himself in his own home. The community room had been transformed for the breakfast. Colorful banners welcomed residents, and tables groaned under the weight of dishes from around the world. Mr. Martinez had even hired professional cleaners to repair all the scratches Karen had left on people's doors over the years. As families arrived for breakfast, Diana noticed something remarkable. People weren't just sitting with their usual friends. They were mixing, talking, and laughing together. Mrs. Rodriguez's teenage daughters were teaching Mrs. Paddle's grandson how to say words in Spanish. Bobby and Tyler were sharing their toy cars, while Maya showed her friends how to make friendship bracelets. Before we begin eating, Mrs. Chen announced, standing at the front of the room, I'd like to introduce our new resident council. She gestured to a diverse group of neighbors, including Diana Johnson, who had volunteered to help lead the community forward. Our first project, Diana explained, is creating a monthly cultural exchange program. Each month, a different family will share their traditions, food, and stories with everyone who wants to participate. The room burst into applause. Already, people were signing up for different months, excited to share their heritage and learn about others. Marcus, who had been quiet through most of the presentation, finally stood up. I want to thank everyone who stood by us during the difficult times, he said, his voice full of emotion. You showed us what a real community looks like. Through the windows, they could see Karen directing movers with her last boxes. No one paid much attention. They were too busy planning future events and activities. Mrs. Patel was organizing a cooking class series. Mrs. Rodriguez volunteered to start a homework help program for the building's children. Even shy Mr. Thompson from 5C offered to teach weekend guitar lessons. Later that afternoon, a new family arrived to look at Karen's old apartment. Mr. Martinez personally showed them around, making sure to point out the newly posted anti-discrimination policies in the lobby and introducing them to several residents. The mother wore a hijab, and her 2 children looked nervous until they saw Maya and Tyler playing on the playground. Within minutes, all four children were laughing together on the swings while their parents chatted with neighbors. "Welcome to Oak Grove," Mrs. Chen said warmly to the new family. "We'd love to have you join our community." That evening, the Johnsons sat in their living room, listening to the happy sounds of children playing outside. Maya was teaching Tyler how to make the friendship bracelets she learned about at the breakfast, their faces peaceful and content. "You know," Diana said to Marcus, "when all this started, I was afraid we'd have to move. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else." Marcus smiled, watching their children play. "Sometimes you have to stand up to the darkness to let the light in," he said softly. Outside their window, the sunset painted the sky in beautiful colors. The playground was full of children from different backgrounds playing together. Parents sat on nearby benches, sharing stories and snacks. The building's bulletin board was covered with sign-up sheets for community activities. Oak Grove Apartments had transformed from a place of fear and division into a true community where everyone could feel at home. The dark cloud of discrimination had finally lifted, replaced by the warm sunshine of acceptance and understanding. As night fell, the last echoes of children's laughter faded away, and peace settled over the building. In the end, love and unity had won over hate and division, proving that when good people stand together, positive change is always possible.